There are very few Americans or American families that have served this nation more honorably or sacrificed more for this country than the family of General John Kelly. And John Kelly's service in uniform, his distinguished service at our Department of Homeland Security, where we saw a dramatic reduction of illegal crossings at our southern border, and his distinguished service as Chief of Staff, gives me and the President great confidence.
All right, the Vice President and by extension the President standing by Chief of Staff John Kelly. Just a reminder, the Vice President was referring to the fact that the General lost his son in the Iraq War. National Review senior editor, Fox News contributor Jonah Goldberg, Washington Free Beacon's Liz Harrington. Jonah, they seem to be sticking by the Chief of Staff right now, but as more, details come out on how they handle this Rob Porter situation, is he on borrowed time?
It's hard to tell. I mean, there are a lot of stories in the press that have anonymous sources saying that they're looking for replacements, they're thinking about replacements, that his days are numbered. On the other hand, one of the reasons why this story lasts so long and is so ironic is that this is one of the very few hullabaloos that come out of the Trump administration that really has very little to do with Trump himself. This was generated by John Kelly, who was supposed to be the grown-up in the room,
right?
And it is, there are a lot of people who actually would prefer to go back to the chaotic days of the first few months of the Trump administration, which were the days that John Kelly banished. And so, in some ways, it's sort of like the clown car wants back into the White House, and that's why the knives are out for John Kelly.
Liz, where is this going?
Well, it's hard to say, as Jonah points out, because this is the same media that said Rex Tillerson was supposed to be gone 6 months ago, right?
I forgot about that,
Pompeo was going to be Secretary of State, or Cotton was going to go over to CIA. So usually the media gets these things wrong. I'm not saying that this isn't a bad scandal and it doesn't look good for Kelly, but the way he turned things around last year, getting the White House back in order, it is funny that, of course, all this chaos is generating because of things that Kelly did, but because it's so separate from Trump, I think they can get past it if they can finally get their story straight on what exactly happened here.
Well, I think where the President got involved in it, whether he liked it or not, was his characterization and supporting Rob Porter, not saying anything about the women who, were victims of this reported abuse. Now, the Me Too movement rose from that, Jonah, as you know, and found an ample opportunity to go after the President. Even Republicans with whom I've chatted on this show and through the course of this whole scandal, whatever you want to call it, have said that he should have chosen his words more wisely or not spoken at all. What do you think of that?
I think he should have chosen his words more wisely. I think there's a sense inside the White House that Donald Trump doesn't want the follow-up question. That if he says, I believe these women, or
right,
that he has sympathy for these women, then everyone will say, well, what about the women who've accused you of X, Y, and Z? And now he's sort of locked in and doesn't want to seem like he's caving into public pressure by saying the words that the press is demanding that he say. And look, this is sort of a perfect storm of screw-ups in messaging. I mean, there was a great anonymous quote in the Washington Post today about how this White House doesn't even have a coherent strategy about how to obfuscate. You got different people, poisoning the timeline, losing the plot all over the place. And that's one of the reasons why the press isn't going to let go of this, is because there's always a new thread to pull on.
Liz, what I'm wondering is, obviously, the relationship the press has had with the President has never been a good one. The President feeds it, the press feeds it, so I don't see that changing anytime soon. But I am amazed on the hyperventilating on whatever the latest issue is. I'm not minimizing this story. Other stories that come up, but I've often preached on our air about the fact that there are 3 news networks, as many business networks. We're all on 24 hours a day. Certainly we can get into all the issues, including what's been happening with the markets, including the progress of the tax cuts and the effect on the economy, all of that. But it's all or nothing. And when it comes to this President, it's all bashing or nothing. What do you think?
Exactly, and you see it daily at the press briefings. I think there were all but 2 questions about this Porter controversy and John Kelly yesterday. They're a one-track mind. If it's a a new phony Russia story, all the questions are about that. If it's the stock market tanking, of course they seize on that because they want it to tank because they think it looks bad for Trump.
Although I
it's
will
just
give
a
some
market
credit,
correction.
they ignored even that when it was more attention on Porter. And so I will give them credit for at least being consistent in that regard. But it just is weird that, and believe me, this is a president who doesn't flip over me, doesn't come on this show, which is fine. But I'm just saying that even I could see through this, you know, you're not even being remotely balanced about it. And this under the guise of we have to know what happened and when, fine. But I think you're being a little bit too highbrow for words here.
And I would just say, look at the coverage of the Olympics in North Korea and how they fawned over Kim Yo-jong. Just because Mike Pence was over there and they have to approach everything as antagonistic to the Trump administration, right. And then they end up propping up the director of propaganda for the North Korean regime. It's really incredible, and this was widespread on the entire mainstream media. Everything is Trump bashing, even if they choose the side of a brutal North Korean regime.
And even to your point and Jonah's point, where it might be warranted, the administration might have given them the fuel for the fire. But where do you see it going? I mean, I could see these issues, Porter stuff, and ongoing more about Russian fixation, that it will be. That's it. That is going to be driving the news cycle here.
Well, no, look, I think that's right. And look, there's. I mean, let's just be honest. Liberal media bias or left-wing bias in the press is not a new story with Donald Trump. I think you're right to say it's heightened, it's more intense, it's more personal with Trump than it has been with some other presidents. Although I do remember, you know, some pretty awful things said about George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan and Barry Goldwater. But I think, you know, in this climate, look, I'm a Trump skeptic, but I also think the resistance types and a lot of the mainstream media are making fools of themselves. I think it behooves sort of everybody not to join the race to be wrong first. And there are so many people who are desperate to have the latest clickbait.
Very well put. That's very well put.
The latest clickbait, the latest gotcha. Just wait for the facts, wait for Mueller, wait to see what happens.
The race to be wrong first. I'm going to steal that one and say I came up with it.
Fair enough.
Guys, thank you both very, very much. But they're both right in this regard. It's a legitimate story. All this stuff, a legitimate story. But when it becomes your only story, whether you like the president or not, at the expense of everything else, I don't know.